My name is Katie Pearce, and I'm the pastor at First United Methodist Church of Morrilton.
And I'm Lauren Delano, the associate pastor at Conway First United Methodist Church.
And you're listening to the Happy Hippie Jesus Show with Bill and Jeremy.
Okay, we have tried to do this multiple times, and you and I have never synced up.
No.
Not once.
And that was on our first try.
Yes.
I know.
We just don't have that kind of talent. You know what? I'm going on strike. Since they got the question right, or got the intro right. I'm just on strike, so you have to ask them all the questions.
We'll be taking over from now on.
You're now in charge for this podcast episode. You can be the co-hosts, and I'm just going to sit here on strike.
They're much cooler than you, too.
That's not hard.
So, Jeremy is this foolish dude, and he believes that Jesus is stuck in Palestine in 33 AD. Could you correct his Christology and answer this question for me? Do you think Jesus is a hippie?
I will, I think I have to side with Jeremy on this. I think the term hippie, applying it to Jesus, is anachronistic. Not to say that Jesus is not alive today. He is. But I still think placing him in like 1960s USA is anachronistic. I'm sorry to say, Bill.
We did talk about this recently, and maybe it's a reverse anachronism, but I don't agree either. I'm siding with Jeremy, which I think there aren't many people that do that on the show.
No, there's not.
So we're here for you.
You know what?
Yeah.
I'm coming back off strike. I learned a new word, and I got people to agree with me all at the same time.
That's true. And
You'll have to put a definition in the show notes, though.
And we need you here, Jeremy, because you never let me talk.
There was that one episode that no one downloaded. So, other than the fact that me and Bill don't behave like Jesus by making fun of each other, so can you tell us a story that'll help us be more like Jesus? It can be from the Bible, from your own experiences. You can make up a story about a Zacchaeus height guy named Bill.
For me, it's the story of the woman at the well in John 4. I love that story. I love the way that Jesus has conversation with the Samaritan woman and they both move beyond identity. They sort of address each other at first thinking about identity, but are able to move beyond those sort of cultural and societal titles we place on people to have conversation. And so the woman at the well becomes a disciple or an evangelist, and Jesus becomes a savior or Messiah, but it's only through conversation that they sort of are able to understand each other in those terms. And for me, that's what emulating Jesus or seeking to be like Jesus is about, is us listening and caring for one another and being in relationships so that we can move beyond those titles or those identities to get to know one another.
I love that story too. When I went to Israel and we went to, possibly the well in that story, that was the one time I was really, really moved by the place that I was at and just almost overcome by that. Whereas when I was at the church in Bethlehem where maybe Jesus was born, it felt more like Disney World because you just stand in lines for a long time. But that one really hit me. I think a story for me that lately has really been on my heart and mind is the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, because when I was 25 years old, one of my best friends passed away, and I remember that was like not even so much the resurrection part of that story. Of course, that's also very powerful, but that Jesus really grieved for his friend and wept with his sisters. And even knowing that this amazing thing was going to happen, that he was going to come back to life, that Jesus took time to grieve first. When I have been in times of grief, that's been really the solidarity of Jesus being in grief as well with us has been very powerful for me. And it's come back recently because I recently did a funeral for a teenager, which was a first for me thus far in my pastoral career. And when it's a funeral for a teenager and it was unexpected, the resources we normally depend upon in our book of worship just didn't seem like enough or appropriate. And that was a story that I wove into my sermon, specifically speaking to the other teenagers in the crowd and kind of telling that story about the solidarity of Jesus and God weeping with us in our grief. So that's one that I carry with me, especially in harder times.
I love the fact that you both used biblical stories. A lot of times people will share a story from their life, which is fantastic, but you're tying it right back into Scripture and one that really speaks to me is the story of Zacchaeus, because it shows that Jesus loves short people.
Well, we are both short people also.
And that's the point of the story, right? Is that Jesus loves short people.
Or possibly that Jesus was short.
Yeah, I like that interpretation too.
It says he couldn't see Zacchaeus because he was short. Who is the he?
Exactly.
Was it Zacchaeus?
Or was it Jesus? I like that. I like your interpretation, Katie. Power to the people.
Power to the people.
To the short people.
That's
Short
right.
people.
Bill's going to preach that on Sunday.
Yeah.
He's changing his text right now.
See, today we have Jeremy outnumbered. we are the majority, and he is the minority.
Can I ask on air, how tall are you?
I'm only 5'6".
Okay, I'm 5'1.5".
I'm 5'1.25". So
That's right. And Jeremy is what, 6'1"?
Something like that.
Yep. But it's better than when I was doing a podcast with Zeke, and he's like, 9 feet tall or something. All our promo pictures, it was like...
Cameron, I think you really miss Zeke. You want to bring him back because you keep talking about him.
No. It's not that I miss Zeke.
I thought you'd moved on, man.
No, as Andrew Sweet said, we're the clergy couple now.
Oh. I don't know what to do with that, so I hope you edit it out. Katie, you, I guess, told a story about you've just done a funeral for a teenager. Mm-hmm. What do you tell people in times of crisis?
Oh, wow. I really do think this is when the ministry of presence is so important, because I don't want to at all diminish the power of the resurrection story. But when someone is 15 years old, to jump to that seems almost trite. You have to spend time in the grief first. So just a lot of time with the family and friends, with our youth group, and crying myself, and just being just a ministry of presence. And I think in those moments to jump to, well, it's okay because she's in heaven. We do know that in our bones, but we also have to go through the process of a really, really deep loss for this person, and also just for the years and decades that we won't get to have. So that was, I think the only thing, I wish I had something really brilliant to say, but I think that's when we have to check ourselves as pastors and know, like, you can't fix this. We love to fix things, and we love to save things. There's no fixing and saving this.
No, I think you actually said something really brilliant in the fact that you said, cry myself. That's what Jesus did with Lazarus.
Yeah.
That was the first thing he did when he got here. Jesus wept, which is the most memorized passage in the Bible.
Yes.
Yeah. Every 5-year-old knows that one, but that was Jesus's ministry in that moment. It wasn't, hang on, I'm going to resurrect him.
Yes.
It was, he wept right along with them. And there's something to be said about that solidarity of weeping with other people.
There is. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll tie it back into both of your stories. If there's a word from God for me right now, it's quit trying to fix everything and just be present. And you talked about being present with people through conversation and a ministry of presence. And I think we overestimate our knowledge and our ability to say and do the right thing to make it all better. And we underestimate how much it matters just to be there with someone, not just in crisis, but in day-to-day life.
Right. Yeah.
Going on that journey with people, and to transition to journey, you guys have been doing some journeying lately, right?
Oh, nice transition.
I know, it's smooth. It's like I've had practice.
You should have just left it there, and you could have talked about how they were spending so much time being present with each other.
Also true.
that is.
Don't try to jump in on my smooth transition.
Yeah. Yes, we are going on a journey with our friend and fellow pastor, Kathleen McMurray. The goal is to go to all 75 counties in Arkansas. And right now we have done 23.
And we have to do it together.
Oh, yeah.
All 3 of us have to be there. It can't be 2 of us, or that one of us went to a county one time as we were growing up. But we started this about 2 years ago, maybe
Yes,
a year and a half.
I think about the time that the itinerant system split our trio up by moving Kathleen to Jonesboro.
That's right. So how this started was that when I moved to Conway to start my first appointment, Kathleen was also in Conway, and Katie was in Morrilton. Katie's in Morrilton still, and I'm in Conway still. But So we were hanging out a lot together when the three of us were all close together. And as a way to make sure we stayed connected to one another, we decided to create a fun plan for that. It also serves as a way to remind us that Arkansas is pretty cool.
It is.
You just sometimes have to go looking for those things to experience and explore that.
And driving through a county or like stopping to get gas also does not count. You have to do something that is either kind of touristy or educational, fine dining establishment, any of those things. But just driving through, we don't count that.
So what if you found like a playground with a really cool slide and you just stopped, went down the slide once, and then got back in the car? Does that count?
It would.
It would. And there are some counties where we've had to do something like that. Like for Nevada County with Prescott, we stopped at the town mural in Prescott that tells the town's history. But we might redo Nevada County because the ARUMC magazine recently did like a story on the Emmett United Methodist Church, and they have a stained glass window of Susanna Wesley, which is not common. So we might redo Nevada.
Yeah, and same with Lafayette, I think that's how you say it, county. Mm-hmm. We went to the Maya Angelou Memorial Park in Stamps, and it was a beautiful park, and we enjoyed our time, but we stood near the water and talked for about 20 minutes. And
there was no big slide.
Have you been to White County yet?
No. Well, we've been to White County, but not all three of us together. Lauren and I have driven through quite a few times on our way to Jonesboro or Memphis.
I'll give you something to do in White County.
Please.
Go to Searcy First Methodist and ask the custodian, because he's the one that's going to be able to show you this. Ask him to show you Donald Duck in the stained glass window in the sanctuary.
Oh, that sounds great.
And once you see Donald Duck, you'll never unsee it.
That's good.
Okay.
One of the things we haven't done a great job of is going to United Methodist churches in the areas that we're going to. We usually connect with a pastor if they're in the area, or at least let them know we're coming through, and they might do a part of the journey with us. But we need to
We've been to Magnolia First United Methodist Church, and we stopped by SAU Wesley when we were in Magnolia as well. But both the pastors were not present, and we just saw the buildings. But beautiful. First Church Magnolia is beautiful.
I'm glad to hear y'all were doing the counties, because the way Jeremy prepped me for this was he told me you were going to every town in Arkansas. And I said, do they know how many towns are in Arkansas?
We joke about how we're going to be just trying to accomplish this goal till we're like 60 or 70. Yeah. So every town would be a lot. Sometimes we're like, oh, next we should go to all 50 states. And it's like, let's just do this first. But normally on a weekend when we go somewhere, we get 3 counties in. And so we're able to explore different places. And it has really been helpful in thinking about where our friends are in ministry, or thinking about places we could serve in the future, to see the beauty and the variety that Arkansas has to offer.
So tell me about an experience that's been really meaningful on your trip.
For me, one of my favorites was Mississippi County, because I am just a huge Johnny Cash fan. I had actually already been to the Johnny Cash boyhood home, but then going with friends was also really meaningful. And when I'd been before, I think I went for the festival. So it was really, really crowded. But then when we went, there were just a few other people there on our trip. And it's a really cool piece of history, not just the Johnny Cash house, which is amazing. And there's a piano, the original Cash family piano with a Cokesbury hymnal on it, which is cool. But also the story of Dice, Arkansas, and it was Great Depression program, a New Deal program. Yeah. And people applied to go live there, and you got, I think it was something like 500 acres. You got a certain amount of seed, but then you had to clear the land yourself. But then the government built up the city hall and a movie theater and the high school. There was even a hospital there at one point. And so Johnny Cash's family applied to go move there, and they were accepted. And there's still something like a couple dozen of those original homes from the New Deal standing, one of them being the Cash house, but other people still live in them. So that was very cool. And then Wilson, Arkansas was also in Mississippi County, and also a really cool little town with a good restaurant. And the person who built it went to England and was really impressed by the Tudor style, and came back and built this town up in East Arkansas, all in that English Tudor style. It's very neat. It's unexpected.
Oh, one of my favorite trips we've done recently is one we just did. 4th of July weekend, we went to Stone County and stayed in this farmhouse with 6 other friends that was off the beaten path outside of Mountain View. And part of this is that we get to use this as our weekend sort of trips that we do Thursday. We often do trips Thursday evening through Saturday. And this one we got to just be in the middle of cow pastures in this house and resting and relaxing and hanging out with people. We cooked a lot of meals together and got to look at the stars and enjoy Arkansas outside of the cities and towns we live in. And got to go to Blanchard Springs Caverns, which I'd never been to before. And so a lot of this is maybe things that are on my list to do, but I wouldn't necessarily do without this sort of adventuresome spirit and the goals that we have. And so just being able to be in community and in company with other clergy, most of the time other clergy women, is just really renewing for me.
Mm-hmm. For the folks at home who don't know, could you describe where Arkansas is? Just kidding. No,
it is actually a problem a lot of people have. I was talking to someone the other day about how I was close to Texas, a friend from New York, and I was like, Texas touches Arkansas, and she's like, I don't even know where you live then. And I'm like,
there's literally a town called Texarkana.
It's really just in the center of the United States. It's not hard to find.
I think the most important thing for people to know is it is not Arizona, nor is it Alabama. Or those are the places where sometimes
the abbreviation is not AK. That's Alaska.
Mm-hmm. It is AR, again, which is not Arizona. I think that's AZ.
You've been able to make it to Izard County while you were up in Stone County?
No.
Okay. First off, there's like the biggest point of interest there is that Bill Sarden served there for a while.
Oh. But is that Calico
Rock? But,
okay.
But when you go there, there's a couple of actually cool points of interest for you to see. First off, Calico Rock has the only ghost town, but don't call it a ghost town there. Call it historic Calico Rock. Ooh. Within a living town. You can go see it. Also, where Spring Creek United Methodist Church is, which is down an old dirt road, the old school was on that same piece of property. And when Frank James had quit robbing banks, he settled for a while in Calico Rock as a school teacher under an assumed name.
Wow.
And I cannot prove it. But Frank James may have gone to Spring Creek United Methodist Church since it was right there next to the school he taught in, and it existed at that time.
Interesting.
So those are points of interest in a very small area that you could have gone to while you were in Stone County.
Well, we were busy relaxing and resting. Yes. But yeah, if y'all have other ideas or anyone listening, if they come up with county ideas, we still have 52 counties to go to. So we have plenty of things to
We have a pretty impressive spreadsheet where we keep running ideas for every county every time we hear about like a restaurant or a state park or something. And we do a fair amount of research, especially when we are trying to do a long weekend and hit like 3 counties at once. But yes, ideas are definitely welcome.
So what's the most surprising thing you've discovered in one of these counties?
Oh, when we were in Ouachita County, we went to a house. Was it from the Civil War?
It was like the McCollum Chester house.
Yeah. So we went there.
Tridester.
But then when we were leaving, the woman who gave us the tour was like really interested in telling us more about Camden.
Yes, Camden.
About Camden. And she told us this story about this woman who was murdered. And they don't know what happened to her.
Well, she just went missing.
Yes.
And was never
That's
found.
right. So I guess she wasn't necessarily murdered, but we assume at this point.
I think she's been pronounced
So
dead.
then she told us where the house was, where she went missing from. And we drove by.
Yes.
And it was pretty eerie as we were like sitting outside the house.
She told us the story, and then we looked it up on Wikipedia because she was very prominent in the community. And then there was a person who they kind of was the presumed culprit, and his family still lives in the town. He was also very prominent, and there was just all these theories about like money and illegal activities. But she had been knitting in her living room, and her husband went to the movies or a bar or something, came back, and like no trace.
if you can't tell, we're really into psychological thriller podcasts and books and
we're going to turn the Happy
related
Hippie
to that
Jesus podcast into a thriller.
I was about to say you're changing us into a whole new genre, the Christian unsolved crime
She
genre.
was actually the first female attorney in the city or the county or something, which was part of what made it so interesting.
I think for me, something that was a surprise and I ended up overcoming a fear is our most recent trip was to Crittenden County. We were actually in Memphis to see Hamilton, but then the morning after, we decided we would walk Big River Crossing to go to West Memphis, Arkansas, and get Crittenden County in on this Memphis trip. But I was making fun of my mother on the way to the bridge because my mother is really afraid of bridges. It's her biggest fear. And I was like, isn't that a funny fear? And then we got on the bridge and it was like graded so you could see the water underneath you. It turns out I am really afraid of that particular type of bridge. And so I had to have Kathleen walk like in between me and the riverside and then just walk with my head up like I was in a marching band or something. But I did do it. And the way back was better. I was just so surprised. I thought it was going to be like the Big Dam Bridge, which does not bother me because it is a solid piece of concrete over a dam. But this was, for some reason, very frightening and a surprise.
Well, you know, that particular bridge, a woman was walking across knitting while her husband was at the movies and she just disappeared.
When I knew I had reason to be afraid. Yeah. She probably slipped through the cracks.
And now we've become a fictional psychological thriller podcast. All while I just sit. This is what happens when I go on strike. Tell me, how has this journey or these visits, how has it shaped your faith or your ministry or your understanding of Jesus? And you can just kind of pick which question you want to answer out of those.
Or just make up a question.
Well, I do think an unintended positive consequence of doing this trip is, as itinerant pastors, we're in the Arkansas conference, so the whole state is up for grabs and a possibility to move. And going to these sometimes very small or more remote places, but then finding really interesting cultural things that are going on, good restaurants almost everywhere we've been, that has made itineracy maybe a little bit more exciting and just less of a fear because we're seeing more parts of our great state. Lauren and I are both from Northwest Arkansas and Kathleen is from Little Rock. So we're from the two major metropolitan areas. And so getting to see particularly South Arkansas and East Arkansas, where Kathleen is now, has been really good.
Yeah, I agree with that. We talk about that a lot when we're driving because we spend a lot of time in the car getting from one side of the state to the other, that just being pleasantly surprised by not just the beauty of Arkansas, it is the natural state, but just by the people and the places that we've come across and the ways that there is vibrancy and life in these areas that we wouldn't have come across otherwise. I think, like I said before, something about having these things to look forward to helps me in my faith and work journey. I'm a person who really likes to have plans and a schedule. And we put these dates on our calendar for when we're going to be together. And it's something to look forward to as a time of rest and Sabbath and renewal in a different way than we might expect. But for me, knowing God and being connected to God comes most through a relationship with others. That's where I see God most and experience God is through community. And so knowing that there's going to be these long moments of community and fun and exploration and adventure really gives me the energy to do the work I'm called to during the week. And then to feel called to this sort of fun opportunity as well offers me joy and a lot of rest.
Katie, you talked a lot about itineracy in your answer. For the folks at home, could you tell people what a pastor is?
Absolutely. Well, in particular, United Methodist pastor is a part of an itinerant system. So we serve at the mercy and pleasure of the bishop and the cabinet, and we every year are up to be appointed to a new place within our conference. So I'm at my third appointment in a third part of the state and different towns each time. And so it has been a blessing in my life because every church I've been to has been really great, and I have gotten to see different parts of the state where I'm not from as well. But there is a fear in that because you're where you live and work is not, you really yield that over to the will of the conference and the bishop.
On your trips, do you guys make a special point of trying to talk to locals and get to know new people?
I think it's kind of in our personalities to get to know people. And we do a lot of things like museums and cultural things where sometimes they're not even that well attended. So we've had some very enthusiastic tour guides. But also, when you tell someone we're all 3 female pastors in the United Methodist Church, they either run the other way or they get really interested and want to talk to you. And most of them get pretty interested and have stories and questions.
I think one of the places where I remember getting to know people the most was in Magnolia in Columbia County. Mm-hmm. We went and shopped downtown and were able to just have conversations, either because we're female pastors, but also telling people that we're trying to see all 75 counties usually leads to a lot of conversation and people sharing either about things we need to do in the location we are now or what we could do later. But yeah, we aren't necessarily afraid to strike up conversations with strangers.
Lauren also happens to know someone in most places where we've ended up randomly.
Is a funny story.
So she's not even always talking to strangers.
One of the first counties we did, Deshay. We went to Hoots Barbecue on our way back from New Orleans, and one of my best friends from high school's parents were also traveling through Deshay and McGee to Hoots Barbecue, and so I got to run into them and hadn't seen them in like 2 or 3 years. And so that's what started Katie's theory, I think.
But then it's happened other times. That was maybe the most surprising one. But when we did Washington County, and which is where you grew up, every place we went, you knew someone, that one's probably not surprising, but it's happened in other places. I can't remember the specifics, but there's a reason it's a running gag.
I have a similar experience. If it makes you feel, I don't know, better or not alone, I tend to run into people I know everywhere I go. My wife will forever be mad at me. I ran into someone I know in Israel coming up out of Jerome's little cellar where and I was like, Raymond? And he's like, Jeremy? And he was there with like a Catholic trip. So I can go around the world and still manage to randomly run into someone I know sometimes.
That's amazing. As clergy, though, I think we do like hearing people's stories. And so that is a really fun thing to hear either people's individual stories from people we meet there or just hearing stories of parts of our state that we would not have known. Like when we went to Poinsett County and went to the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, that is in Tyronza, which back in the day was kind of a little socialist hub. And it was actually formed because this person who was running for president for the Socialist Party stopped in Tyronza, Arkansas, and they were having a lot of issues with people not being treated fairly. And so it was the first integrated union in the United States, but it was because like the sheriff and the mayor and then the guy running for president were all socialist and came together and had this idea. So you get to hear really cool stories that I didn't learn that in history class. That
is the place that I need to take my youngest son, Wesley, because last year he tried to organize a communist march on the playground. So.
He would
love it.
And they will stay open for you if you get there 20 minutes before they're closing.
They will.
We're very excited to see you.
Yes.
So there's like 3 different ways I want to take this conversation at once, which is a common problem in my life. You used the word Sabbath earlier. But you're going places and doing stuff.
Yeah.
I thought Sabbath meant like I had to sit on my couch and I couldn't mow my yard. So why don't you just take a few minutes? What does Sabbath mean, I guess, to you? And how can we tie that into our own lives?
Before you answer that, let me remind you, I use that sometimes to get out of cleaning the house.
As I mentioned earlier, for me, Sabbath is about connecting with God, and one of the ways I do that is through connecting with other people. I think that rest and relaxation looks different for everyone. Don't get me wrong, if there's an evening I don't have a church meeting, I am happy to go sit on my couch and watch TV, and that is relaxing and resting in that moment. But Sabbath is a time of rest for us when we can connect with God in any way. Often we think about the 7th day of creation and the first creation story and that God rested, and so then we rest too. But I don't think that has to be defined into boundaries of sleeping and not doing work. as people of faith, we think of that as connecting with creation, maybe connecting with others. Some friends I have do want to just not make any plans for the day and see what comes for their day. And I think that's a great way to spend Sabbath. But for me, it is about planning and about making time for people that I love and exploring new places. And so we can all have different definitions of Sabbath. For some people, it is cleaning, in fact, on their day of rest.
Yeah.
Don't listen, honey.
They
Do not
find
listen.
that to be really restful and re-energizing for them.
Cool. And you, Katie, you said something earlier too. When you tell people you're 3 female pastors, that you get all kinds of reactions.
Yes.
I'm just going to sit back and you can just tell me a story, or you can talk a little about what it's like to be a female pastor, or you can tell an interesting reaction, however you want to take that.
Well, like one story, one of the early counties that we did is we went to go visit Kathleen, who lives in Jonesboro, which is in Craighead County. And then that's when we went to both Poinsett and Mississippi County. We did a long weekend with 3. But the first thing we did is when we got into town that night, we went to a restaurant. The name of it is either Omar's or Oscar's.
I think it's
One of the two. It started with an O and it's a name. And we were sitting at the bar and like ate our dinner there. And so the bartender was very friendly, started talking to us. And when he found out we were 3 pastors, he had a lot of questions. He was Jewish and wanted to talk about his faith. And we just had this great conversation with him really for like the entire dinner. And he was the 4th member of our dinner party. Well, then that was a Thursday or Friday night. On Sunday morning, when Kathleen went to serve at Cornerstone United Methodist Church, one of her parishioners said, "Oh, I went to Omar's last night and the bartender said that there were 3 female pastors there early that weekend, and we knew one of them had to be you." Because although there are more and more women going into ministry and going to seminary, we are still enough of a rare breed that if you see 3 of us together, particularly in this age bracket, they're like, it's a safe bet that Kathleen is one of them in Jonesboro. So, but that is, we get fun reactions and people want to sometimes talk about church or their faith and sometimes just think it's like a really interesting anomaly. So
I kind of get the same reaction when I tell people I'm a pastor. They look at me and go, "Really?"
I think with us too, it's not just that we're women and younger, we're also single, which is another thing that sometimes not even people who are not Methodist, but even people in our own churches are sometimes surprised by when they get, I've been told after the fact that when a church reads my profile and finds out I'm coming there, that sometimes the single thing throws them off more than the female thing.
And I think that's one of the reasons we have all become such good friends and why we have, we have each other to travel with and to enjoy life with. And so that's one of the reasons this county thing has been fun for us, is that we get to do that together and live life together. Part of a strength of the Arkansas Annual Conference, I think, is the support that clergy women give one another. Coming back to Arkansas, not having any family that live in Arkansas, I was coming back on my own. Not really having any connections with the conference at all outside of my Hendricks connections with JJ Whitney and Wayne Clark. But I can't imagine 3 years later not having come back here and not having these relationships that these women have become some of my closest friends. And so even though we are sort of an anomaly out in the world, we are not to one another, and we really are able to support each other and care for each other through clergy women's gatherings and just through our wanting to be around each other and have fun. So
being single clergy women, do you find your congregations are just dying to fix you up with their nephews, sisters, son, this or that?
I've been lucky in that at the churches I've served, usually some person, I think kind of sent as a representative of the congregation, will ask, "Do you want to be set up?" And I've said no. And they've really dropped it after that, which I really think that's a fine thing to do. I didn't think that was inappropriate for them to ask, especially my first congregation was in Bismarck, Arkansas, which is a really small town, and all my relationships were at the church. I didn't have any community much outside of that. So I appreciated the offer and politely declined, and they really respected that. So if you're going to respect the answer, I think that that's okay. But I do think sometimes there's a bit of a curiosity and a desire to set you up with somebody.
Yeah, lucky for me, not many people have asked those questions about a nephew or a son or anything like that. One thing I think is really unique, and maybe y'all can say if you disagree with this, but for me as a single clergy woman, it means that my congregation has become some good friends, especially people of different generations. I think like as pastors, we minister to people of all generations. That's not abnormal, but I spent a lot of time with the mother-in-law of one of my staff who is in her 60s, and she's become one of my closest friends and someone I enjoy spending time with. There are people who have taken me in as their sort of fourth child and are my family that I go eat a meal with when I am looking for something to do in the evening, or I have a family who is my Sunday lunch family that I always go to lunch with. And so I have really strong relationships in those ways that if I had a partner or a family, that would not necessarily be an opportunity that I would get to explore. So that's something I've really loved about the local church and about the way they do support me as a young female clergy.
I don't know. I have families that I feel like have adopted me, that they think of me as their son or their grandson, and they look at my kids like their grandkids or their great grandkids.
That's probably true. That I think probably makes a difference too when you.
And I think some of that's just being relational and how you want to approach people, and
it sort of depends on your theory of ministry too. There are some people that don't want to maybe build those sort of friendship relationships with their congregants for various reasons. I think as an associate pastor, that's sort of a unique opportunity for me too, because there's two of us to minister to people in different ways. But for me, I think I wouldn't have survived these 3 years without having congregants as friends and people who care for me.
Now, Lauren, this is your first appointment. You've stayed at your first appointment through the whole time. Katie, you've moved around some. So let me ask this question. How difficult is it for you to leave behind those relationships that you create at the churches?
It's very difficult because one thing we covenant to do as elders who itinerate is that when we leave, you leave the church. You're no longer their pastor and you don't come back even for big events. And I think this is probably true for every pastor, but it's particularly when you're single, you really build your supportive community. And I think one of my gifts is building community. So it's hard to build that all up. And then when you leave it, you go somewhere else by yourself. You're not taking your spouse or your most supportive person. So there are usually at each church one or two people who I maintain a friendship with where it's very clear this is not a pastor-congregant relationship, because it would be almost impossible to drop these relationships that have become so meaningful and like family. But I really do keep it to that and try to hold to our elders' covenant as best as possible. But that is a hard thing that I hope the cabinet considers when they think about appointments, is you're not having to think about my spouse's job or my kid's school district. But if you move us around too often, which sometimes I think happens with single people, we're constantly leaving community and you're kind of forcing us into isolation. But I've been able to stay at Morrilton longer. Actually, by the end of this year, it'll be twice as long as any other church I've served, which has been a real blessing to really get to make more roots, not just in the church, but in the community outside.
Lauren, you've been at First Conway, 5 years now?
I'm starting my 4th year.
Okay, 4th year. How are you preparing? Because you're going to be a future rock star in our conference. How are you preparing for having to leave behind those kind of relationships?
Yeah, not very well. It's definitely hard to imagine leaving, though. I feel like every year as the appointment season comes around, I sort of am ready and expecting that call, because we could get that call every year. Once I made it through my 2 years of residency and was ordained. So it is hard to imagine moving, because this church has been so wonderful and because they really supported me through the ordination process. That was 2 years, and really enjoyed and have enjoyed being along the journey with me of being a new pastor. They've let me fail and try new things. And so I hope that that's the case for every church I go to, that they're supportive and excited about the ministry that I want to do and the relationships that we can build together in the ministry they can do. But it is hard to think about moving. Although, even though I haven't moved yet in the itinerant system, I did move from Boston back to Arkansas, having no relationships. I did really benefit from moving to Conway, where I'd gone to college. So I knew the town and was able to get acclimated in that way. But it is hard to imagine moving, but it's not hard to imagine there are other churches that will be loving and accepting and excited to embrace ministry with a new pastor. So that is the hope. And like Katie said, these county trips sort of offer that glimmer of hope too.
If you'll allow me, this guy named Jesus said, "Don't worry about tomorrow, for today has enough trouble of its own." So I think you should just reject Bill's question of preparing to move and tell him tomorrow's got enough trouble. Today has enough trouble.
That is good advice.
I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, but it is harder once the spring rolls around to not think about it. I think for any of us.
Yeah.
If you think about it too much, I think it's hard to do ministry where you're at because you're just preparing for what's next. But that is the one constant kind of for us is our deep, holy friendships between other clergy a lot of the time. And so that is another benefit of the county trips because we spend time with the three of us together, and then we see other friends who live in more remote parts of the conference as well.
I offer you that advice because I too tend to live my life in the future. And I know we've talked about that some in other places. So I can get very caught up in what might happen or what's going to happen.
Sure.
And I think the invitation for me is always to come back to the present and to always be here. I'm really bad at accepting that invitation.
Yeah,
I try to live my life from one meal to the next. Easy, bite-sized chunks. I think this whole podcast has been about this final question, but if maybe you have another answer to this question, what is it that's saving your soul right now?
One thing for me is just travel in general. These county trips are really important to me, but I also love traveling for continuing education because that means I get to learn sort of at my own pace and learn the things that I'm interested in learning as a pastor. But also usually continuing education means friends are involved as well. And so we get to go learn together, like when we go to Kansas City for Leadership Institute or things like that. So just having those moments, like Jeremy is talking about, where I can look forward to something on a calendar. I'm going on a trip in September with Haley Jones, another pastor in the conference, and one of her friends, we're driving from San Francisco to Portland in September. And so just having those sorts of fun things planned, fun travel planned really gives me excitement and saves my soul. Also, I'm really in the ministry side of things. Something that's saving my soul is an excitement about intergenerational ministry. Really interested in that right now and interested in ways that we can do more than just sit next to people of different generations in pews and worship, and what that looks like for us to not be so siloed in our age level ministries, but to be in relationship with each other in new ways. And so that is something I'm really excited about, and that sort of saves my soul, is this reminder that we're meant to be in relationship with each other across generations.
Yeah, I would say at church, one thing, I don't know if it's saved my soul, but I'm very excited about it, is we're going to this fall be kicking off a new ministry at UACCM, which is the community college, University of Arkansas Community College at Morrilton. We've never really had a presence there as a church. And so that's been an exciting thing this summer, that it really does save the Monday through Thursday grind to have something that you're really, really looking forward to and that's new and exciting. Outside of my ministry, something that is giving me life is reality TV has been so good lately. It has just been the summer for reality TV, and I've been introduced to some new shows by friends as well, and I am just loving it. And it is, while I'm halfway joking, it is a great point of connection for friends, and nothing lets me unwind more than like an episode of The Bachelorette or Selling Sunset or 90 Day Fiancé. This is good stuff, people, and I would recommend all of those to you. In addition, The Hills New Beginnings, I can't really recommend it, but it has given me a nice sense of nostalgia for my college years. So,
you know, I think it is fantastic you guys are doing these trips. They're soul giving, they are life giving, and I'm jealous because Jeremy never takes me anywhere.
That's true, Bill.
Well, maybe we'll inspire you, or maybe y'all can join us on a county trip sometime.
Oh, that would be fun. Thank y'all for joining us today. We've had a great time with you. Miss seeing you guys.
I know.
Yeah, it's been good.
It's been fun.
Thanks.